So here we are, it's the final 10 lessons that I've learned about board game design and the board game industry after 10 years of designing games. I'm Adam Porter, I design games, I review them on this channel as well. If you like what I do, please subscribe to the channel, share the videos, comment. I really like to read your comments, and I'd particularly like to read what are the lessons you've learned about board game design if you're following this channel and you're trying it out for yourself. And I'm sure you've learned some lessons, maybe you'll be able to teach me some things. So we have, as usual, our cards, which I have written some lessons that I've learned. Now, as always, you know what I'm going to talk about before I do, but I'm going to go through them in a fairly random order. And the first lesson here is you define success for yourself. Now, I'm guilty of this. I talk a lot on this channel about success as if it's one thing, okay? And when I'm talking about success, I'm generally talking about commercial success. So I'm talking about sales and profit. And that is definitely not the definition of success for everybody. And it's not even the definition of success for me in every case. You define success for yourself. It might be a great success for you just to get the game out of your head and make it playable on the table, even if you never play it with anyone other than yourself. That might be a success. Or it might be a success to produce a game that you play with friends and family and they love it and they ask to play it again. That might be a significant success. It might be a success to create a new mechanism. Okay, even if it never goes any further, just to feel like, yes, I did it, I achieved it, I overcame an obstacle. It might be a success to get a game licensed to a publisher, to have your name on a box. Then you might start to think about, well, I want to win an award. Okay, that could be a goal for you. Or it could be success is all about the sales, about the money. It could be about crowdfunding, producing your own game. All of these things could be a measure of success. You define it for yourself. I said earlier on in a previous video, way back in the list, you're not an aspiring game designer. If you want to be a designer and you're living that life, then you are a game designer. You define it. You define what matters, what is successful, what your thresholds are, what your goals are. Don't make the game which you want to play. I feel like I'm contradicting what I've said previously. Of course, you can make the game which you want to play, but if you make the game that you want to play, you've got to consider that it may be you don't find too many other people who want to play it with you. All right, you are probably not representative of the entire market. I know I'm not. Okay, I like some weird games, right? I'm not representative. Lots of my favorite games are not commercial smash hits, right? So if I make the games that I want to play, well, they're not going to do massively well in the market. And doing well in the market is, for me, a definition of success. Okay, so it's important to me that I make games that other people want to play. And so that means empathy. It's the reason I stress it here is because it's such a commonly shared bit of advice, and I'm not sure it's always the best bit of advice. I see it so often, people saying, you make the games that you want to play. My bit of advice to you is, make games that you would enjoy. And I don't think it's great advice if people are looking for commercial success. Yes, it's hard to predict the future. Yes, it's hard to predict what people are going to like and what publishers are going to want. But you don't just wash your hands of it. Try, learn about it. I've mentioned previously, become an expert. Okay, that doesn't mean you know everything. You're not a mind reader, but you can make strategic choices, just like you can make strategic choices when you're playing a game. Don't just write it off as random chance and just design something that you want to play, because you're really going to limit your audience by doing that. Unless you're happy with just designing something that's going to be played by very few players, in which case, go for it. That's fantastic. I'm delighted for you. Please do it. I realise I'm doing that thing which I said publishers do in the previous video, talking in hyperbole. Don't make the game you want to play like it's an order. You do what you like, okay? And my instinct, though, is if you want to make a commercially successful game, think about your audience. Make sell sheets. Oh, a nice simple one. I've previously said make sizzle reels, make sell sheets. That's the other really useful tool that you have in terms of sharing information with publishers. A sell sheet is a single page, usually a single page of A4, and it has an image of the game, it has some basic information about the game, components, it has the hook, it has your contact details, Maybe it explains how a turn of the game works, but I wouldn't go into detail about the rules. What we really want to know is, why should I care? And it should really grab someone's attention within seconds. Okay, split seconds. Somebody should be looking at the sheet and thinking, yes, okay, I know what this game is. Often those sell sheets will accompany your first email to a publisher, or they'll ask for them when you're submitting games through an online form. Not all publishers like sell sheets, but I find them really useful to have handy when I go to conventions, to give to a publisher so that they can discuss the game with their colleagues without having to get all the components out if I leave a prototype with them, etc. So sell sheets, I think over the recent years, they've become increasingly sort of required. Publishers ask for them more and more, and people share them a lot online and ask people's opinions about them. But get good at them, get good at making sell sheets. I've got a video on how to make them, so if you want to find out more, go and watch that video. Be willing to change your theme at a publisher's request. If you don't want to do this, then you're going to have a bit of a problem licensing your game to publishers. I'm trying to think now with my games, how many of them have been published with a different theme. Actually, I think they've all had their original theme. Is that true of all of them? Yes. Yeah, okay, there we go. All 8 of my games, and in fact, the 2 which I have upcoming, they've all kept their original theme. So publishers do go with it. If you pick your theme well, they'll stick with it. Oh, Zingazam, that changed its theme a little bit, slightly. It's a bit of a vague theme though. It's not a very thematic game. Publishers always say, are you open to us changing your theme? And I know that it happens an awful lot in the industry. You don't want to close down those avenues, close those doors by saying, absolutely not. I'm rigidly stuck to the theme that I've come up with. So be willing. If you're not willing, you might need to think about self-publishing if you really want to hold on to that creative control and have the game exactly how you want it. Publishers depend on partners and distributors. So publishers get the blame for a lot. Publishers make a lot of statements that they then renege on. They go back on what they've said and things like that. Usually they're really honest about it. What I've found is sometimes a publisher will love a game that I've shown them. They'll tell me that they think it's wonderful, that they think it's got loads of potential in the market. It sounds like they're going to give me a contract. Then they go out and they show the game to their international partners from other publishers, or the people who are going to be distributing their game, or perhaps even just some colleagues in their company, and they get a different response. People will tell them, do you know what, maybe the game's quite good, but we don't think it's marketable. We don't think the market right now is right for this game. Or they say, we don't enjoy it. We see problems with it that maybe the publisher hasn't initially seen. They depend on this feedback. They can't work without their international partners and their distributors. Most publishers are not big enough to go it alone. And so if their partners, who are experts, are telling them this game is not a goer, give up on it, then you're going to be out in the cold. Don't blame the publishers for that. Okay, the publishers are doing their job. Hopefully they haven't yet given you a contract, which they're then reneging on. They might have given you some praise and some feedback, which is all useful for you. But as I said previously when I was talking about hyperbole, take it all with a pinch of salt. Until you've got a signature, you can't be sure. And even when you've got a signature, they might later renege on that deal. That's where advance payments and things like that come into it, which we've talked about previously. But publishers do not know everything. They rely a lot on other people in the industry to give them information, to share their views and thoughts. So you can't rely on that one person that you're sitting and talking to in a pitch meeting. They're not the decision maker. Ultimately, it's usually a team that comes together. If your game is rejected by everyone, don't self-publish. I really believe this. I have games which I have shown to many publishers, maybe 20, 25, 30 publishers over a number of years, and I've tweaked the game each time to sort of try and fix it, deal with the feedback that I've been getting, and all the publishers are telling me there's a problem with the game. And even if I strongly feel that the game has value and I love it, maybe it's the game that I want to play, maybe we're going back to that, that's not enough. If everyone's rejecting it, you can guarantee that players are going to reject it too. The purchasers are going to reject it too. You might get lucky, you might, but you also run the risk of running a crowdfunding campaign, spending an awful lot of your own money and time for, nothing. It doesn't come to anything. It fails. You lose a lot of money. Or you have a successful crowdfunding campaign and then you have to deal with all the criticism from the players who don't like your game for all the reasons that the publishers didn't like your game in the first place. It's not fun receiving criticism from people online. Maybe I've stressed that point a little bit too much through these 100 comments. I think I've sounded a little bit negative. But don't put yourself in that position. If everyone's telling you your game is not a winner, maybe shelve it and move on to something else. Don't use that as an excuse to self-publish. Self-publish if you want to self-publish, right? Don't self-publish because you can't find a publisher. That's a bad starting point. Some games are hard to sell. Yeah, unfortunately there are just some genres which are more difficult than others. And sometimes it's groupthink, sometimes it's just marketability, things like that. So classic examples, sports games based around, football, baseball, basketball, whatever it is, fishing. It might feel like there's a massive market for that. There must be some crossover. There must be, between people who like to watch football and people who like to play board games. So why shouldn't a board game about football work? And for some reason, they don't seem to sell. Well, that's what publishers tell me. And I guess it's because people separate those things in their mind. If they want to watch football, they'll go and watch football or play football. They don't need to play a game about it to experience that part of the hobby. Mind you, you could say that about anything. If you like bird watching, you'd go out and do some bird watching. You wouldn't play Wingspan. So I'm not quite sure why it is. I think part of it is the abstraction of playing a board game. It's not necessarily the best way to represent a sport. I think that's the best examples of sport-based games are action games, like for example Subbuteo for soccer, where you're flicking the players and you're knocking the ball around the pitch. It's a fairly good simulation because it's action-packed, it's fast. Same with tennis. I really like the game Set and Match, which is a flicking game where you're flicking a disc, which represents the ball, across a court. I think those games sometimes do better than card games or strategy games, which, abstract the sport to a great degree, add a whole load of rules that you wish you didn't need to learn in order to play the game. Other games that tend to struggle a bit, it's hard to find publishers for abstract games, and I think that's because it's hard to find the hook. Right, an abstract game might only have 3 or 4 rules, so it might be super duper simple, and when you demonstrate it, people might get really hooked on it. That's a great abstract game, but it's very hard to explain that on paper. Why is this abstract game special? One example where I think that it does have a great hook is Quarto. Quarto is a game from Gigamic where the hook is, on your turn, the other player chooses which piece you have to play. I think that's a really lovely, beautiful hook, and that abstract game has been a bestseller for years and years and years. I think it's a phenomenal game, but most abstract games, even if they're really clever and really engaging and addictive, they don't have that strong hook because they don't have a theme. They don't have, even a mechanical hook. They're not deck building games or worker placement games or all these trendy things. So you're relying on, an aesthetic appeal and a publisher's credibility and things like that. I think it's hard for most publishers to get involved in that arena. That said, there are some publishers who specialise in this. Not many, but there are a handful of them. And so if you have a really strong abstract game, those are the places to go. If they all say no, then I think you're a little bit stuck, frankly. Other games, I've struggled in the past with a word game. I have a game which I think is quite strong. I feel it is. And it's a spelling game, okay, like a Scrabble type game. It's a simple card game, very, very simple. But you're creating words from the component letters. I love it. I really like it. And I couldn't get anyone really to look at it. I mean, not even look at it. Publishers would just say, we don't do those sorts of games without even, contemplating the actual gameplay. It did get licensed to a publisher at one point, but that was one of the games that then later got returned to me after years and years of the publisher kind of sitting on it on the shelf, like, yes, next year we might do it, and eventually handing it back to me. So I think word games, abstract games, sports games, There are bound to be other examples, but there are certain genres where you're just setting yourself a hard task if you get into that realm, sadly. Never search the discard pile. Right, there haven't been many actual mechanical lessons in this list, but this one I guess is my number one bugbear. I really don't like games which have a card where the power is, when I play this card I get to search through the discard pile and choose a card to add to my hand. Because inevitably it just slows the game down to an absolute crawl. Like now we've all got to watch you reading 70 cards as you go through that discard pile, choosing which one you want to use. Those cards, it's the one time in a game where I regularly house rule. So if I have a card like that in a game, and if I can do it without breaking the game, I'll take that card out and I'll hide it under the insert. I've talked about this in previous videos. I'll get rid of the card because I don't want that experience in the game. Now it would be a little bit different if you were playing a game like Ticket to Ride or something where basically you've got 5 or 6 different coloured cards and that's all the information on the card. So if I know when I'm searching that discard pile all I want is a pink card, right, well that's going to take me seconds to search through the discard pile and find a pink card. But if all the cards have different abilities and information on them, never search the discard pile. It's just a terrible rule. Equally, search the deck. I don't like search the deck of cards. I don't like use an ability belonging to another player because then I've got to search through all the cards laying out in front of them on the table. All those things really slow a game down to an absolute crawl. I know lots of games feature these things. I wonder why it hasn't become outdated at this point. Do not pay for placeholder art. Your alternative is to find images off Google, for example, and I know a lot of designers just choose any old image they can find on Google. They don't worry about the copyright issues and things like that. That's very, very common in the industry. And I can see why people are upset about that, so I do go out of my way to try and find games which have a public domain license, you know, the Creative Commons license. You can find websites like Pexels and Pixabay and Unsplash. Those are the names, I think, of the ones that I've used. The Noun Project. These are all useful websites for finding art where the license is free for you to use. The problem with those is even there, I struggle to know really what the license allows me to do. And also, if I use the Google, on Google you can search for which of these have Creative Commons licenses. I'm never really sure whether it's accurate or whether someone's just plugged that in there. You don't really know. The really useful thing is none of this is going to be used commercially anyway. These are essentially placeholders for a sort of proof of concept or to set a mood, something like that. And that's really effective for then sharing information with publishers about what your vision of the game is. And then they can go on and create the game to that vision or not. They can make their own vision for the game later. So I wouldn't tie yourself up in knots about it. You just need to create something that's basically functional and gets your vision across to a publisher, but never pay for it. A game designer, for the average game, you might be earning hundreds, maybe a couple of thousand, maybe if you're doing really well, a little bit more. But you could pay that on a single piece of art. If you've got a game where you need 100 cards with different pieces of art on it, you cannot afford to commission that artwork yourself as a designer. You can't. You would be. The industry would collapse. Okay, you would be making an enormous loss. If you're self-publishing, clearly. Self-publishing, you're going to have to commission artwork and you're going to have to invest that money yourself. But that investment should be made by a publisher. Once you've licensed a game to them, they can invest the money in getting the artist that they want to use, hopefully artists that you're happy with too, and create the beautiful looking game at that point. Accessibility trumps just about everything else. And that's a nice one to end on, really. This is at the end of my 100 lessons. Most players, most of the market, does not want to learn a whole load of rules. They do not want massive setup times, massive teardown times. They want to be able to play the game, get it out the box and play. Even if one person has learned the rules, if it takes them 10 minutes to teach other people, they're going to be zoning out, it's going to end up sitting on the shelf. If you want big commercial success, accessibility trumps just about everything else. Now there are exceptions because there are companies who make it their unique selling point that they create highly complex games. So we might be looking at things like Splotter and, you know, Vitel Lacerda has a sort of reputation for highly complex games. You know, those sorts of areas, yeah, okay, accessibility is not everything. But for genuine commercial success, to achieve massive sales, accessibility is so important. Okay, so streamlining, stripping out rules, even if you really like them. We've talked previously about killing your darlings, getting rid of rules that you really, really like just to make the game as playable as possible. And of course, accessibility brings in things like being colorblind friendly, making sure your text is readable, making sure your rule books are effective so that you can onboard people easily. It trumps just about everything. There we go. That's there's a final sort of closing thought for you. Focus in on that streamlining. So there we are, 100 lessons that I've learned over 10 years of designing games in this weird industry. I hope you've learned a lot from this. I'm sure there are some bits that you won't have agreed with, or where you're carving your own path. I'd love to hear about what you're doing differently and what lessons I could learn from you. And also, I'd love to hear in the comments about anything that I've talked about that is a revelation to you. Hopefully there's something in there where you go, oh, do you know what, I've never quite thought about it like that. And I'm going to do things slightly differently from here on. That would be good to hear too. And all of that brings me to a close. I will see you on a future video. I don't know what will be next. Around this time of year, there's my top 10 games of 2023. I don't know whether I'll have released that before or after this. I'll probably be doing a bit of a wish list for 2024. Again, I don't know whether that's before or after this one. You'll have to check around on my channel. And I've got a couple of ideas for some other more in-depth, detailed videos around game design that will be coming up soon too. So until next time, all the best.